My brother didn't bring me to that dinner to celebrate me. He brought me the way you bring an old couch to the curb, just to get it out of the house before someone important arrives. His name is Marcus. He's 38, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who fills a room not because he's interesting, but because he's loud in the right registers. He works in commercial real estate development, or he did, and he spent most of his adult life learning how to look exactly like the kind of person other people want to invest in. Our parents built that in him, brick by brick, starting when we were kids in Akron, Ohio, and they decided he was the one worth building. I'm Vivian. I'm 31. I'm due something nobody at my family's dinner table has ever fully understood, and I stopped trying to explain it around age 26. I'm a healthcare data systems analyst. I look at hospital networks, claims data, patient flow, staffing logistics, billing infrastructure, and I find where the bleeding is. Not the visible kind, the kind that shows up in spreadsheets and denial rates and preventable readmissions that cost a system millions before anyone notices the pattern. I work independently, mostly. No office, no letterhead, no LinkedIn profile with 100 endorsements. Just contracts, deliverables, and results that speak to people who know what they're reading. My family does not know what they're reading. The dinner was my parents' idea. My brother had recently started dating the daughter of a man named Walter Kress, and Walter Kress was not a man you Googled without sitting down first. He built a regional hospital network from 4 struggling community hospitals in western Pennsylvania into a 12-facility system with a national reputation for operational efficiency. Health policy people referenced his model. Administrators flew in from other states to study it. He was, in the language my father used whenever he said the name, somebody. My brother had been dating Petra, Walter's daughter, for about 7 months, long enough to get invited to her family's home for Thanksgiving. Short enough that he was still performing. He called me 2 weeks before. "Mom wants you there," he said. He didn't say "I want you there." He said "Mom wants you there," which was his way of outsourcing the invitation so he couldn't be blamed for it. "For Thanksgiving," I said. "Yeah, at Petra's parents' place in Fox Chapel. It's a nice house. Wear something that fits." I waited a beat. What does that mean? "It means wear something that doesn't look like you rolled out of a server room." He laughed like he'd said something affectionate. He hadn't. "It's a big deal, Viv. Walter Kress is gonna be there, Petra's whole family. Just be normal." "Define normal," I said. He paused. "Don't talk about your work. Nobody's going to understand it, and it'll just make things weird." There it was. Same as it always was. "Not we're proud of you, but it might confuse people. Just don't. Don't exist in a way that complicates the version of us my brother needs people to see." I should have said no. I've said no before and it's always cleaner. But my mother had called the day before, and her voice had that particular texture. It gets when she's both asking and not asking. Soft at the surface, load-bearing underneath. And she'd said it would mean a lot to have the whole family together. The whole family. As if my presence completed something instead of complicating it. So I went. Fox Chapel is north of Pittsburgh, the kind of neighborhood where the driveways are longer than some people's commutes. The Kress house was federal style, white with black shutters, set back from the road behind old oaks that had been there longer than anyone's memory. Inside, it smelled like wood smoke and roasting herbs, and the particular warmth of a house that gets used, not just maintained. Petra met us at the door. She was warm and genuine in a way that made me feel immediately guilty for every defensive thing I'd been rehearsing in the car. She hugged my mother like she meant it, shook my father's hand, and then looked at me with bright eyes and said, "You must be Vivian. Marcus talks about you." I glanced at my brother. He smiled with his whole face except his eyes. "Good things, I hope," I said. "Of course," she said, and her certainty was kind enough that I almost believed it. The living room was full of people. Petra's aunt and uncle, a cousin from Columbus, 2 of Walter's old business partners and their wives. The kind of gathering that has its own gravity. People orbiting each other in practiced social loops, the conversation light enough to travel. My mother inserted herself into the center of it within 4 minutes flat. My father found the men near the fireplace. My brother moved to Petra's side like a magnet finding north. I stood near a bookshelf by the window and read the spines and thought about leaving. Walter Kress came in from the back of the house carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a flannel shirt that probably cost more than it looked like. He was shorter than I'd expected. Mid-60s, Silver hair trimmed close, a face that had done a lot of listening over the years. He had the calm of someone who'd been in enough rooms to stop being impressed by them. He made his way around the room, unhurried, shook hands, laughed at something the cousin said, refilled a glass without being asked. Marcus tracked him the entire time. Not obviously. My brother had learned subtlety the way some people learn a second language, functional but accented, but I could see it. The slight angle of his body toward Walter whenever Walter moved. The practiced ease that took effort. Eventually, Walter drifted toward the bookshelf. Toward me. Marcus materialized at my shoulder so fast I nearly startled. "Walter," he said. His voice dropped half a register into what I thought of as his boardroom timbre. "I want you to meet someone." Walter looked at me with the open attention of a man who genuinely wanted to know who he was meeting. Marcus put his hand on my shoulder. It felt like being tagged. "This is my sister," he said. "The one our family sort of." He laughed once, easy and dismissive. Gave up on figuring out. My mother, who had drifted close, let out a small laugh of her own. "She's always been in her own world," she said. "We love her, but..." She made a helpless gesture with her free hand. "She's never really found her footing, you know." My father nodded from 2 feet away. Slow, indulgent, like he was confirming a gentle diagnosis. I kept my face level. My hands were cold. Walter Kress looked at me, not at my dress or my posture or whatever social signal my family thought I was sending. He looked at me, the particular, careful attention of someone used to spotting the thing underneath the thing. His expression was polite. Then something shifted in it. "What's your last name?" he asked me directly. "Marsh," I said. "Vivian Marsh." Walter Kress went still. Not the polite pause of someone searching their memory. The stillness of someone who had just found something they'd half believed was lost. The wine bottle lowered slowly in his hand. "Vivian Marsh," he repeated. His voice was very quiet. My brother blinked. "Walter, she's just..." Walter didn't look at him. He looked at me, and his expression had moved somewhere past recognition into something that looked uncomfortably close to relief. "Did you consult on the Allegheny intake restructure?" he asked. "About 4 years ago, submitted through an anonymous RFP channel." My heart did something strange in my chest. "The one for the Westmoreland facilities," I said carefully. "The dual-site billing audit and the readmission clustering model." "Yes," he said. The word came out like a door opening. Marcus made a sound I'd never heard from him. Something between a laugh and a question. "Walter," he tried again. "She does some kind of data work. It's not..." "That analysis," Walter said, still looking at me, "saved my network $4.3 million in the first year alone. We restructured our entire intake methodology around it. I've been trying to find the person who submitted it since 2021. The room had not gone quiet. People were still talking near the fireplace. The cousin was laughing at something across the room. Someone was moving dishes in the kitchen. But the small sphere of air around us had changed entirely. My mother's expression did something complicated that her face didn't quite know how to finish. My brother stood very still. "I submitted it through the open RFP portal on your system," I said. "I wasn't contracted. I saw the data in a public filing and I couldn't leave it alone." Walter's mouth curved slightly. Not a smile exactly. Something more like recognition. "You couldn't leave it alone," he repeated, like he was confirming something he already knew. My operations director spent 3 months trying to trace the submission. The contact information in the portal was a forwarding address. It went cold. "I move around a lot," I said. "Different contracts. I don't keep a fixed office. What do you do now?" "Same thing. Independently. Hospital networks mostly, sometimes insurance infrastructure, wherever there's a pattern that's costing more than it should." Walter looked at me for another moment. Then he said, simply, "I'd like to talk to you properly. After dinner, if you're willing." I nodded. "Okay." He moved away to greet someone else. Easy, unhurried, like he hadn't just quietly rearranged the air. I turned and looked at my brother. Marcus was staring at the middle distance, the particular expression of a man recalculating in real time. My mother had found something very interesting to examine in the pattern of the rug. My father had stepped back half a pace, which was as close as he ever got to removing himself from a scene. Nobody said anything. I went back to reading the book Spines. I should tell you what the Allegheny Project actually was, because it matters for what came later, and because it's the kind of thing that sounds dry until you understand what it means in practice. About 4 years ago, I was in between contracts. I had a small apartment in Pittsburgh's Lawrenceville neighborhood, exposed brick, a drafting table I used as a desk, a view of a tire shop. I was between projects, and between projects my brain does what it does, which is look for problems. I'd been doing some reading on a public CMS filing about hospital readmission penalties in the western Pennsylvania region. One network kept appearing in the data in a way that was statistically strange. Not bad enough to draw regulatory attention, but off-pattern. In a way I couldn't make myself ignore. The Cress Health Network had 4 facilities at that point, all of them in a transitional phase after a partial merger. The intake coding at 2 of the facilities was misaligned in a way that was creating downstream billing denials. Not fraud, just structural inconsistency that was generating phantom costs and suppressing reimbursement rates on a cluster of high-frequency diagnoses. If you didn't know what to look for, it looked like normal variance. If you did know, it looked like a slow leak in a pressurized system. I built a model over about 3 weeks, working from public filings, CMS data, and some industry benchmarks I had from a previous project. I mapped the misalignment, projected the annual cost, and wrote a restructuring recommendation with a phased implementation path. Then I looked up the Cress Health website, found a general RFP submission portal for independent consultants, and sent it in. I didn't expect anything. I'd done things like that before. Sent unsolicited analysis to systems I thought could use it. Sometimes I got a form rejection. More often, I got nothing. I filed it away and moved on to a paid contract in Columbus. I never heard back. I assumed it sat in a queue and got deleted. That happens. Organizations get unsolicited submissions from 50 people a week, most of them trying to sell something. I wasn't trying to sell anything. I just wanted the leak fixed. Apparently, it was fixed. I just didn't know. After dinner, Petra guided me to Walter's study with the warmth and directness of a woman who knew exactly what her father was about to say and thought it was overdue. The room had the organized density of a workspace that actually worked. 2 monitors, stacked folders, a whiteboard with a half-finished flowchart that I recognized as a patient throughput diagram. He was clearly still in it, still building. He closed the door, sat behind the desk, folded his hands. "I owe you an explanation," he said, "and probably an apology." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "When the submission came in, my operations team flagged it. They weren't sure if it was credible. It came in anonymously. The methodology was dense. We had a third party review it." He paused. "It was credible." "Okay." "We implemented it across all 4 facilities over 18 months. The results were significant enough that I had the model reviewed again, then expanded into 3 additional facilities after the merger. We still use the core logic." He looked at me directly. "I've wanted to find you for 3 years to compensate you properly. The submission came through as a pro bono consult. We had no basis to compensate you for it at the time, but that didn't sit right with me." I was quiet for a moment. "It was pro bono," I said. "I wasn't looking for payment. What were you looking for?" I thought about it honestly. I wanted to know if I was right about the pattern. Walter smiled fully for the first time. It changed his face considerably. "You were right. Definitively, expensively right." He leaned forward slightly. "I have a situation that needs someone like you. I have 12 facilities now. After the last acquisition, I'm seeing anomalies in 3 of them, billing patterns that look operational on the surface, but I don't think they are. My internal team is good, but they're too close to it. I need outside eyes." "How long have you been seeing the anomalies?" 8 months. "Do you have a hypothesis about the source?" "I have 2. I'd rather not bias your analysis before you look." That was exactly the right thing to say. Most clients tell you what they think the answer is before you've started looking, and then your job becomes confirming their assumption rather than finding the truth. "Send me the access parameters," I said. "I'll start with a structural audit and we'll go from there." He nodded. "There's one other thing." He hesitated, which seemed uncharacteristic. "My director of network integrity is leaving at the end of Q1. It's a senior position, full oversight of data systems across all 12 facilities, with authority to drive structural changes. It would be a significant change from independent consulting." I listened. "I'd want you to consider it," he said. "Not as a way of retaining you, The contract would be clean regardless. Just a genuine offer when the time comes. I looked at the whiteboard behind him. The patient throughput diagram, half finished, pulling at my brain the way unfinished things always do. I appreciate it, I said. Let me do the work first. Then we'll talk. The drive home from Fox Chapel was 45 minutes. My mother sat in the front seat of my father's Subaru and did not speak for the first 20 minutes, which was its own kind of communication. My brother drove separately. He called me before I'd made it out of the neighborhood. I let it ring. He called again when I got on Route 28. I picked up that time. I just want to understand, he said. His voice was controlled in a way that meant it wasn't. What do you want to understand, Marcus? When were you going to mention that you'd worked with Walter Kress? I didn't work with him. I submitted an unsolicited analysis through a public portal 4 years ago and then forgot about it. That's not... He stopped, recalibrated. You made me look stupid. I felt something tighten in my chest and then deliberately loosen. I didn't do anything tonight. You introduced me as someone the family gave up on. That was a joke. It wasn't, and you know it wasn't. Silence. Petra's going to think he started. I don't actually care what your worry Petra thinks, I said. You brought me to that house and told a man I'd never met that your family gave up on me. In front of your girlfriend, in front of Mom and Dad. And they backed you up. Vivian. You've been doing this our whole lives, I said. My voice was even, not loud. I'd learned a long time ago that loud doesn't carry as far as level. You don't introduce me to people. You explain me, like I'm a condition, like I need to be contextualized before I'm allowed to take up space. He was quiet for long enough that I checked the phone to see if the call had dropped. Walter offered me a contract, I said. An audit of the network anomalies. I'm going to take it, Vivian. If something comes up in the audit, it comes up. I work the same way I always work. Is that a threat? I thought about it. It's a description of how I do my job, I said. Which you'd know if he'd ever asked. I ended the call somewhere around the Highland Park Bridge, the Allegheny running dark and wide below, the city lights scattered on the water like a second skyline. I rolled the window down and let the cold in. I started on the Crest Health audit 10 days later. Walter's team set me up with red access to billing systems, network utilization reports, contract documentation, vendor agreements. I built a working environment on my own hardware, same as always, and started doing what I do. By the end of the first week, the whisper was there, 3 facilities. 2 of them sharing a procurement vendor for medical supply logistics that had been added to the network contracts 18 months ago, right around the time of the last acquisition. The vendor's invoicing patterns were irregular, not the normal irregularity of a supply chain under strain, but the specific kind that happens when someone is siphoning margin by inflating logistics fees on high-volume, low-scrutiny line items. Catheter kits, IV supplies, disposables that get ordered in high quantities and don't get audited closely because the per-unit cost is low even when the aggregate isn't. By the end of the second week, I had the shape of it. The third facility had a different issue, a coding pattern in its outpatient billing that was suppressing reimbursement rates on a specific diagnosis cluster and rerouting the captured margin through a contract adjustment line that didn't have a corresponding service record. I made a chart of the money, where it was coming from, where it was going, who had authorization at each node. I stared at the authorization column for a long time. My brother's girlfriend's name appeared twice. Petra worked in her father's network as a regional operations coordinator for the Western Pennsylvania facilities. She had authorization access to vendor contract approvals in the procurement system. Her name sat on 2 of the vendor addition approvals that initiated the anomalous pattern. I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling and thought about what kind of person I was going to be in the next 24 hours. I could have gone to Marcus. That was one option. Whatever had broken between us, he was still going to marry this woman. He deserved to know. But I thought about the way he'd introduced me at that dinner, the weight of his hand on my shoulder, the one our family sort of gave up on figuring out. And I thought about the way Petra had greeted me at the door like I was actually welcome. I called Walter directly. I told him I had findings and that some of them were going to be difficult and that he should set aside 2 hours. He said, "How soon?" I said, "Tomorrow." He didn't ask me to preview it. He just said, "I'll clear the morning." The meeting was in Walter's office, which had the afternoon quiet of a building that empties out early on Fridays. Just the 2 of us. I walked him through everything: the vendor scheme, the billing suppression, the authorization trail. I showed him the charts the same way I always show them, because numbers don't have feelings, and the cleaner the presentation, the less defensible it is to argue with. Walter didn't speak for a while after I finished. Then he said, "Petra's approvals, yes. Do you think she built it or inherited it?" That was a smart question. It was the exact right question to ask. The vendor relationships were established before her authorization access was granted, I said. Her approvals may have been a mechanism, not an origin. But that's a distinction your legal team and HR will need to make, not me. I can only tell you what the data shows. What does the data show? That someone is redirecting roughly $2.1 million annually across 3 facilities through structures that require internal access to initiate and ongoing internal authorization to maintain. I paused. Whether Petra understood what she was approving, I genuinely don't know. The data doesn't tell me that. Walter looked at the printed chart for a long time. "I need to ask you something," he said finally. "And I need you to understand it's not a request, it's just a question." "Go ahead." "Marcus, your brother. Did you consider his situation when you decided how to handle this?" I looked at Walter Kress across the desk. The whiteboard behind him still had the half-finished diagram I'd been trying not to look at since I walked in. "I considered it," I said. "Then I did my job." Walter nodded once. The way someone nods when they've received exactly the answer they needed, and it's both better and harder than they hoped. "Thank you," he said. He meant it in the way that cost something. What followed wasn't clean or fast. These things never are. Walter brought in outside legal counsel and a forensic accounting team, and I handed off my documentation and stepped back because my work was done. The internal investigation took 11 weeks. Petra was ultimately found to have been an unwitting participant. Her approvals had been used by a procurement manager with deeper access, who had built the structure and walked her through the authorizations as routine processing. She cooperated fully once she understood what had happened. The manager was terminated and referred to the Allegheny County DA's office. I found all of that out later, in pieces. Walter updated me periodically, not because he owed me a briefing, but because he seemed to feel that I'd earned the ending. Marcus found out the night Walter called him. He didn't call me. Not that night, not for several weeks. When he finally did, it was a Sunday morning in February, and his voice had lost the boardroom register entirely. He just sounded like someone's brother. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't. Petra didn't either." "Not really. I know." A pause. "You could have buried it." "No," I said, "I couldn't." He was quiet for a long time. I listened to him breathe on the other end of the line, and I thought about the two of us as kids in Akron, building something out of couch cushions in the basement while our parents had company upstairs, and how easy it had been to be on the same side back then, before the world decided there was only room for one of us in the story. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what I said at dinner." "Okay," I said, not "it's fine," not "don't worry about it," just "okay." Because it wasn't fine and we both knew it, and the only honest thing I could give him was the truth of that without making it bigger than it needed to be. "You really just sent it in and forgot about it," he said. 4 years ago, and didn't hear back." "Yeah. And you never told anyone." "There was nothing to tell. I thought it got deleted." He made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had tried harder. "Vivian, what? I really didn't know what you did." "I know," I said. "You never asked." That sat between us for a while. Not as an accusation, just as a fact, doing what facts do. Walter offered me the director position formally in March. I sat with it longer this time than I had at Thanksgiving. A few weeks, a few walks along the Allegheny, a few late nights with the kind of math that isn't about numbers. I said no. Walter received it the same way he'd received everything else from me. With attention, without reaction, followed by a question. "What do you need that this doesn't give you?" he asked. "The ability to walk away when I'm done," I said. "I'm not good at being inside a system. I'm good at seeing it." He considered that. "Independent contract. Multi-year retainer, not project by project. You control your hours and your access parameters. You report to me directly." I looked at him. "That's not a no." "It's not supposed to be," he said. "We structured it over 2 weeks with the help of a contracts attorney I trusted. It was the kind of arrangement that actually worked because it was built around how I actually worked, not around what an org chart needed me to look like." My mother called when she heard. Her voice had the particular sweetness it gets when something has rearranged her understanding of the situation, and she hasn't fully processed what that means for her narrative. "Sweetheart," she said. "Walter Kress, he's really somebody." "I know," I said. "We've always believed in you," she said. "You know that." I held the phone and listened to February traffic outside my window and thought about the bookshelf in Fox Chapel, and the weight of Marcus's hand on my shoulder, and the word footing, and the helpless little gesture she'd made with her hand, and I said, "I know, Mom," because she needed to believe it, and because some truths don't need to be spoken out loud to be perfectly, quietly understood. I still live in Lawrenceville. Same brick apartment, same drafting table, same view of the tire shop, which has since been replaced by a coffee place that I go to more than I should. My second monitor has a new data set on it most mornings before 9. I don't post about the work, I don't do conferences. I just find the patterns. What I know about systems, after all of it, is this. They don't fail loudly. They fail in the spaces where people stop paying attention, in the gaps between what the structure shows and what it actually does. The failure is always already there, waiting to be found by someone who knows how to look and isn't too invested in the answer to look honestly. My family labeled me a long time ago. The one we gave up on figuring out. It was easier for them than the alternative, which was paying attention. I never needed them to figure me out. I just needed to be left alone long enough to do the work. I've thought a lot about what Walter said when I handed him my findings. Not the formal part, not the audit language or the numbers or the next steps. The part after, when the room got quiet and he looked at me and said, "Thank you," in the way that cost something. Like he understood that what I'd given him wasn't just data. It was the choice I'd made about what kind of person I was going to be when it was inconvenient to be honest. That's the thing nobody tells you about integrity. It doesn't feel heroic when you're doing it. It feels like sitting alone at a desk at 11 o'clock at night, staring at a name on a spreadsheet that you wish wasn't there, knowing that what you do next is going to cost you something you can't fully calculate yet. Petra had been kind to me when she didn't have to be. Marcus was going to marry her. My family was already barely holding together. There were 100 reasons to look away, to soften the edges, to hand Walter a partial picture and call it complete. I didn't look away. Not because I'm unusually brave or unusually good. I did it because I've spent enough years watching what happens to people who make the other choice, who protect the comfortable version of events instead of the true one, and I know how that ends. It doesn't end in relief. It ends in a smaller and smaller life, built around the maintenance of a lie that started out small and never stopped growing. What I've learned, not from any philosophy I was taught but from the specific texture of my own experience, is that the people who underestimate you are usually doing it because understanding you would require more attention than they've decided you're worth. Marcus didn't introduce me as someone the family gave up on because it was true. He did it because it was easier than explaining me, and because he'd never actually tried. My parents backed him up because that was the version of the story they'd been telling for years, and by the time we were standing in that living room in Fox Chapel, it had calcified into something that felt like fact. The thing about facts, though, is they have a way of reasserting themselves. Walter Kress had held on to a piece of work I'd done anonymously 4 years earlier because the work was real, and real things don't disappear just because no one's paying attention to them. I didn't need my family to see me clearly for the work to matter. It mattered regardless. I think that's the part worth holding on to wherever you are in your own version of this. The effort you put in when no one's watching, the problem you couldn't leave alone even when there was no reward for solving it, the late nights and the quiet and the discipline of caring about something enough to do it right, that doesn't evaporate. It sits there, waiting. Sometimes it waits years. You don't have to perform your worst to make it real. You just have to keep doing the work honestly, even when the room has seated you in the corner. Especially then. The corner, it turns out, has excellent sightlines.